Dzień dobry Państwu, witam wszystkich bardzo serdecznie. Jest mi bardzo miło, że Państwo tutaj dzisiaj z nami są. Przede wszystkim dziękujemy, czy też ja dziękuję Biennale Warszawa za gościnę. I dziękuję też za nie tylko gościnę, która dotyczy dzisiejszego dnia, ale za współpracę, którą tym programem mamy nadzieję nawiązać, czy też którą już nawiązaliśmy i która będzie się rozwijać w bliższej i też mamy nadzieję nieco dalszej przyszłości. Dlaczego mówię o współpracy, czy też dlaczego ten dzień dzisiejszy jest raczej początkiem pewnej historii niż jej zwieńczeniem? Otóż dlatego, że ten weekend poświęcony sztuce spółdzielczości jest właściwie początkiem pracy nad założeniem tutaj w Warszawie kooperatywy artystycznej, czy też spółdzielni pracy postartystycznej, nad którą pracujemy wspólnie z grupą wspaniałych współpracowników, między innymi z Kubą Deczyńskim, Bogną Stefańską, Kasią Kalinowską, Adeliną Cimochowicz. Kooperatywą, czy też spółdzielnią, o której Państwo na pewno jeszcze będą słyszeć w przyszłości. I nie tylko dlatego, że będą o niej słyszeć jako o czymś, co się dzieje poza państwem, ale też jako czymś, co ma być jednak formą otwartą, czy też jakąś strukturą, w których pracy można się włączyć, czy też która będzie jakoś taką kulą śnieżną, która będzie zagarniała różne projekty, pomysły, czy też współpracowniczki i współpracowników. I będzie takie zaproszenie do współpracy, będziemy na pewno wystosowywać wtedy, kiedy nadejdzie na to czas, a nadejdzie na to czas wtedy, kiedy będziemy mieli ten pomysł jakoś już bardziej opracowany. Sama sztuka spółdzielczości jest projektem, czy też pewnym pomysłem, który wynikł z rozmów pomiędzy tutaj właśnie Pawłem i Bartkiem i mną, Pawłem Wojcińskim, Bartkiem Frąckowiakiem i mną jako kuratorem tego przedsięwzięcia. I z naszej jakiejś wspólnoty zainteresowań, która z naszych rozmów szybko wynikło, że jesteśmy zainteresowani tym, w jaki sposób sztuka jest robiona, w jaki sposób jest organizowana, jakie ekonomie dookoła niej funkcjonują, czy jakie funkcjonują w niej, ale też w jaki sposób można używać artystycznych metod do tego, żeby przemyśleć ekonomię jako pewną domenę życia społecznego. Ten program, który tutaj prezentujemy, jest efektem nie tylko naszej współpracy tutaj z Biennale, ale przede wszystkim efektem współpracy z dwoma innymi sieciami czy organizacjami, z którymi mam przyjemność współpracować. Center for Plausible Economies, które założyliśmy z Katherine Böhm w poprzednim roku w Londynie, o której Katherine opowie więcej. Kolektywie właściwie pewnej instytucji badawczej, która zajmuje się zarówno ekonomicznymi uwarunkowaniami sztuki, jak i artystycznymi interwencjami w życiu ekonomicznym. Poza tym mamy dzisiaj przyjemność gościć Binnę, Choi i Katherine Gibson, kuratorkę i geografkę ekonomiczną, feministyczną ekonomistkę, z którymi pracujemy wspólnie w sieci badawczej, która się nazywa Community Economies Research Network, czyli sieci badawczej związanej z ekonomiami społecznościowymi, o której to koncepcie Państwo też będą mieli okazję dzisiaj usłyszeć o wiele więcej. Co istotne, dzisiejsze spotkanie jest też wstępnym etapem czy jednym z elementów całego weekendu, czy też całego przedsięwzięcia, ponieważ jutro pracujemy wspólnie od godziny 12 na trawniku właściwie Zamku Ujazdowskiego, czy też w parku obok Zamku Ujazdowskiego, obok tego pieca chlebowego, który tam został zbudowany. Organizujemy warsztaty związane z redrawing the economies, czyli z przemapowywaniem ekonomii. W tym przedsięwzięciu bierze udział szereg osób, które też są dzisiaj z nami, między innymi Alicja Rogalska, Alicja Wysocka, Diana Lelonek, Katka Bleichert, plus szereg innych osób, Iza Kaszyńska, z którymi wspólnie będziemy starali się przemapować jakby struktury organizacyjne i przemyśleć jakby w jaki sposób w ogóle pracujemy. Co robimy, jak robimy sztukę, w jaki sposób ona się rozwija, jak są zorganizowane te środowiska podtrzymujące sztukę, czy jak wygląda jej jakby jakaś ekologia. Ale też jak można wykorzystać metody artystyczne do w ogóle przemyślenia ekonomii w jakimś szerszym sensie. Bo między innymi też w ramach tych ćwiczeń będziemy chociażby mapować kooperatywę spożywczą dobrze. Czy też będziemy w ogóle się zastanawiać na przykład nad wspólnotą międzygatunkową, czy też tym, jak można w ogóle ująć w jakimś naszym myśleniu o ekonomii wszystkie te byty, czy sposoby pracy, czy sposoby funkcjonowania, które nie przyjmują postaci monetarnej, nie mają charakteru czy pracy najemnej, czy nie mają charakteru sprzedaży towarów, nie mają charakteru kapitalistycznego przedsiębiorstwa, a jednocześnie odgrywają znaczącą, jeżeli nie pierwszorzędną rolę w życiu społecznym, czy w ogóle w życiu ekonomicznym. I tak naprawdę zdamy sobie sprawę z tego, że właśnie ekonomia, którą normalnie postrzegamy jako coś, co jest coś, co zasadza się właściwie na pieniądzu, czy zasadza się na obrocie pieniądzem, zasadza się na sprzedaży pracy najemnej za pieniądz, czy na sprzedaży towaru za pieniądz, czy na zarabianiu pieniędzy, czy akumulacji kapitału, jest tak naprawdę tylko czubkiem góry lodowej. Jest czymś, co jest bardzo widoczne, ale jednocześnie skrywa wielką masę społecznych relacji ekonomicznych, transakcji, sposobów zorganizowania ludzkiej pracy, która stanowi podstawę jakiejkolwiek funkcjonującej ekonomii. O czym dzisiaj opowiedzą nasze panelistki. Program wieczoru będzie wyglądał w taki sposób, że wpierw o swoim przedsięwzięciu artystyczno-ekonomicznym opowie Katrin Böhm. Następnie przejdziemy do wykładu Binny Choi o Casco Institute of Art, który został przemianowany na Casco Working for the Commons, o czym też Binna opowie, jak to się stało, że instytucja sztuki staje się procesem pracowania nad dobrami wspólnymi, i Katherine Gibson, która podsumuje nam te rozważania, czy jakby te prezentacje bardziej praktyczne podsumuje rozważaniami teoretycznymi na temat statusu tych zróżnicowanych ekonomii społecznościowych. Przedstawi też projekt tego, w jaki sposób tę ekonomię można odzyskać na rzecz szerszych społeczności. Także bardzo Państwu jeszcze raz dziękuję za przybycie. Teraz już bym przeszedł na język angielski, bo w takim języku dzisiejszy wieczór będzie się odbywał, z racji na to, że panelistki tak właśnie takim językiem operują. I coś jeszcze chciałbym dodać tak, że po każdym wykładzie będziemy mieli trochę czasu na to, żeby zadawać pytania, i też taką szerszą, podsumowującą dyskusję zorganizujemy na koniec. Także po każdej prezentacji, jeżeli ktoś ma jakieś pytanie odnośnie do tego, co się zobaczyło, bardzo proszę je zadać. Będę do tego gorąco zachęcał, a później na koniec też możemy się zastanowić ogólnie nad tym, co tutaj, o czym było mówione właśnie, o kwestii zróżnicowanych ekonomii w sztuce i poza tym. Okay, so now I'll switch to English. I will not repeat everything what I said, you already know it pretty well. Using this opportunity, I wanted to thank you again for coming to us. I wanted to thank Katrin, Binna and Katherine for sharing their thoughts and experiences and practices and theories. And I would like to invite Katrin Böhm for the stage. Katrin is Katrin is a London-based artist whose collaborative work focuses on the collective reproduction of public space, trade as a public realm, and the everyday as a starting point for culture. Katherine is a founding member of the many collectives, including My Villages, the Artist Initiative, Keep It Complex, Make It Clear, Art and Architecture Collective Public Works. She's at the Haystack series in 2013 and Art Enterprise Company Drinks in 2014. Together we also established the Center for Plausible Economies in 2018. She recently, co-edited with My Villages a book Rural in the series Whitechapel Documents on Contemporary Art. Katherine, thank you very much. The microphone is yours.
Thank you. Am I picking the slides?
I can.
That would be great. Okay, thanks for the invitation. I was asked to talk about company drinks as an artistic practice, and that's what I'm going to focus on for the next 20 minutes. So company drinks, one-liner, elevator pitch, is art in the shape of a community drinks enterprise. Next slide. Now you could ask why art and why business, which I think both are very important questions. So art, and I'm going to answer this on very personal terms, I think art is incredibly important. I studied art not because I wanted to become an artist, but because I think art is one of those remaining territories within society where we can try different ideas, where we don't have to be functional, commercial, where we can kind of resist a certain kind of neoliberal way of running society. So art is very important. It's a privilege, and I think it's a privilege that we need to share and spread instead of kind of keeping it as a privilege for the arts community itself. I think that's a real danger, then art should go. If art can open up and share the privilege and become a certain kind of cultural democracy, then it can stay. Why business? Business to a certain degree is a means for me. Business is a way of like organizing production and reproduction, but of course there's an interest in who's producing value, how is value then, how does it become physical, what embodies value, how do we trade with each other, what's fair trade, and so on. So business is kind of an important mechanism and means to maybe practice art. And those are the two kind of main conditions for company drinks. Next slide. Yes. I'm in a very funny mood. I think it's Friday evening, but I'm going to stay serious. So, as an artist, I think when people ask me what I'm doing is I'm really interested in kind of nurturing, supporting, and making public realms or public spaces that are complicated, messy, diverse. It's not a word that I like very much when it comes to public space, but that's my main interest. Like, how do we kind of keep a public realm multicultural, opposed to like having it as a kind of monocultural thing. So yes, I'm interested, those are my kind of big interests in artists, like architecture, like the production of space, who's producing space, and economy, both as kind of everyday phenomena that we all shape, but are very often kind of seen as kind of specialized, outsourced things that others manage on our behalf. ACA, practicing ideas and possibilities on a one-to-one scale. My practice most of the time happens on a one-to-one scale, with the idea that the critique or critical response to something in society happens on the scale of that thing. Critiquing economy as we know it happens on the scale of a business that kind of has its own ethics of economy. ACA opening things up instead of narrowing them down. I mean, it's a different way of saying really resisting this kind of neoliberal push, like for all of us to have very narrow roles in society, to allow for a certain fluidity of us changing through different roles and generally like stopping things from further narrowing down. ACA, Keep It Complex, Make It Clear, the group I founded a few years ago, which addresses itself very much to artists and artists who have a kind of social practice, possibly a kind of political ambition, but maybe together, collectively finding a language and forms of expression where we kind of insist that this is kind of political work, and where we insist that we want to keep things complex instead of simplifying it, but making it clear. Next slide. And this is, who's going to time me? You? Yeah. Oh, okay. Just to quickly say, before I start with company drinks, this was an exhibition I co-curated with Gavin Wade for East Side Projects a few years ago, and it was an important exhibition because it was an exhibition of artists who use trade and transaction and production as their practice, who kind of practice a kind of critique towards current mainstream economics by having one-to-one systems of trading and producing and establishing economies. Next slide. And I think because I'm mainly here to talk about artistic practice in the context of like running a business, running an enterprise, it is also to recognize that there's a very kind of varied art practice out there of artists reclaiming trade as a kind of cultural space, producing their own shops, stores, and so on. And it's not always kind of meant as an alternative to mainstream system. It's meant as a kind of also possible system, maybe subverting the other system, maybe collaborating with the system. You this morning talked about ecosystems of interdependence. Trade show was at a time quite important to step away from a certain Marxist language when it comes to talk about economy and maybe establish a kind of slightly plainer language that allows for other possibilities. Next slide. And a very important, and I'm going to leave this to you in a minute, the very first trade show was with Katherine Gibson, using the iceberg image, and the iceberg image we will talk about later, but for us it was really a key moment to declare economy as a cultural everyday realm that we all shape through kind of every transaction and every small action we do as artists, but also as like citizens on a day-to-day basis. Click, click. 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 So I'm going to talk about company drinks. That's our logo. It can stand for quite a lot of things. Sometimes I let the audience interpret what they think it could be. It's obviously company. It's Katherine Gibson. No, you're with a K. Sorry. It could be communism, it could be commerce, it could be collectivizing, it could be cola. It can be a lot of different things. And this ambivalence is on purpose. But of course, the two main meanings of the word company is what shaped the whole enterprise. The idea of running an enterprise, having a business, but creating a space for being in good company. Thank you. Yeah, I have lots of these for later. Next slide. So I quickly explain what it is, because it is quite messy, it's quite complex, but it is rooted in a very kind of local history of East London. Company Drinks is based in East London, on the periphery of London, and it's rooted in a working class history of people from the East End going hop picking to the nearby countryside. So it's kind of rooted in a kind of local collective heritage. I'm not going to go into this, but basically, since this hop picking history has finished, the geography and demographics of London have changed dramatically. So when I came up with this idea of revisiting this hop picking history, these change in demographics informed the proposal for what this new company could be. So we would work with a different community that now lives in Barking and Dagenham, where we are, but we would also work with a shift in geography. There is no clear countryside anymore, there is no clear city, so we work with this kind of also ambivalence of geography in our project. Next slide. So there was a very simple invitation to start with. The invitation wasn't, let's have a business together. The invitation was, let's go picking again, which with everybody who is from the East End of London would remember what going picking means. So that was a very open invitation. In terms of artistic practice, it's in the neighbourhood of London where there's no biennial, there are no art spaces who would facilitate or have an infrastructure for then kind of growing this. It was something that had to grow through word by mouth, talking to people, spreading this invitation. as widely as possible. Next slide. Now the big difference to this like former economic model of going picking, where hop farmers basically just needed cheap seasonal labour to pick the hops to then profit from trading as hops, making beer and making money. We kind of changed this economic logic around picking and make the picking part of a production cycle which becomes public, but also kind of slowly and hopefully establishes a form of commoning where we carefully think about what local resources are, what's available, who are the communities going picking. So the C in the middle now stands for like, I can't do this now with the mic, but I have a tablecloth here. In terms of a public realm, company drinks is this kind of publicly accessible production cycle that's running along the seasons. So the C remains in the middle, open to interpretation for what it could stand for, but then we are organized around the seasons, obviously, because we are picking, and then the key activities around the drinks production become this like public space, this kind of collectivized cycle of production. And over the years, we've been going for 5 years, a lot of them have become very concrete. I could give names to each of this aspect, but maybe leave this, you can click it.
Okay.
My main job is to keep people busy. No. So this commoning on a one-to-one scale is about thinking public space in our cities. How do we use them? How do we use our green spaces? Are we just walking our dogs? What can parks mean? What's the public time we have together? Who's meeting whom in our cities? It's about collectivizing the anti-mono. A critical questioning also what the local is. Reclaiming a certain richness, as the tablecloth is illustrating. And I think company drinks, in terms of when we organize our practice and organize ourselves as artists in a kind of societal context, it's about culturing systems that maybe reproduce practices of commons rather than reproduce art market ideas or art market pressures. Next one. So we go picking, numbers, roughly 1,200 local residents a year come to this, like all those activities around our central communism. They wouldn't come if I would say that. So we have a very kind of wide age range of people coming to those picking trips for all sorts of different reasons. With every person who comes, there's a different deal why they're coming. The CERN has also the idea that it has many, many access points. People can come for all different reasons and for many different, out of many different interests. Next slide. Thank you. I mean, maybe I should also say that Company Drinks is my studio. It's the place where I, as an artist, think about how I want to position myself, what my skills are, and what I want to get out of it, where I kind of make things in the thinking, where theories become practice. So for me, it is my studio as well as a drinks company and other things. So our picking starts in March with birch sapping. That's very exciting. Use the drill, kids, very excited. That's all. And then we go around the season by either making people pick. Those are school children, they hate it. Awful. It's like, green spiders, soil, terrible. It's compulsory. They have to do this as part of their education because I think it's really important that kids know where their food comes from. And once we start making drinks with them and have the drinks, it gets a bit more excited and they become enthusiastic. But just to say, this is not voluntary. Next slide. This is extremely voluntary. Those are either people who have been hop picking in the 1950s or come from families who have been hop picking. So for them it's a kind of nostalgic trip back to a hop farm and we hand pick hops for the day. What's to say about this photo? 90% of them voted Brexit. So that's where I, with this idea of like keep it complex, make it clear, We made it very clear during the referendum that company drinks is the project, a drinks company that believes in collaborative approaches, outward looking and so on, and we suggested to everyone to tick remain the ballot, which caused quite a stir at the time. People didn't want us to be political, they wanted us to be simply social and have this like nice time together going picking. So since then we have a bit of a conflict, and in a quite subtle way we're kind of trying to address this conflict on a regular basis. We've introduced community lunches, which are called Digesting Politics, where we talk about food politics, to talk about wider politics, but where we also try and culture a way of exchanging political ideas within company drinks. So this, next slide. I could talk forever about that. That's family trips where the going picking invitation reaches quite a big demographics. We get families from almost any cultural background that is in the neighborhood, because your kind of Jamaican family remembers how they pick food and put it in their mouth. Your East London family does. So this is kind of quite a broad range of families coming picking. The deal is they get a free trip, which is meaningful in a community, in a neighborhood where a lot of people are so poor that this British country should be so ashamed of their kind of Victorian policies there. Anyway, no, next slide. What's important in terms of the production is, there's of course this kind of production of the social together, the picking together, the kind of experiencing a certain collectivized production again. The trips then turn into drinks, and the documentation of the trips become the labels. We drank most of them yesterday, I apologize, but there's a few left. So then in terms of art, when we talk about those bottles, what are they? They're kind of documentation of something that really happened, the container for the drink we made, and then an embodiment of what's collectively possible. They're also just a drink. They're a very expensive flyer to promote our enterprise. Next slide, Kuba.
Can you talk about labeling also production costs and values?
Huh?
Production costs and values on the label.
Yeah, so for some of the drinks we now have labels that also examine what we or individuals who come invest into this trip, into the picking, what the non-quantifiable resources are that we're using, and the actual kind of monetary cost. So I have to go a bit faster now. We are not just staying local, because I think this is really terribly dangerous to like just focus on the local. There needs to be a trans-local. Every community needs to understand there's other similar communities. They might look different, they might tick different, but it's really important to kind of get away from the local. So we're kind of going to other growing spaces across London, also as a form of like knowledge exchange between kind of green food producing projects. Next slide. This is what I would call landscape painting. You can also call it a mapping. There's a lot of artistic practice translated into drinks, and I'm not claiming all of this to be my invention, but if I think about those things as an artist, this clearly is a kind of visualization of community-run green spaces in London, which then also kind of become co-producers in this drinks making. Very pretty as well. It looks good. Next slide, I'm going to explain later why it has to look good. We make our own cola, so kids mix cola concentrate under non-existing health and safety conditions. Next slide. We don't bottle everything, I don't want to claim this. Everything that's carbonated is made by a small soda producer, and the beer is made by quite a well-known craft brewer, which are also kind of interesting relationships, how quite commercial businesses work with us and how we articulate them. Friendly businesses. We make twinned drinks with other cities. That was one with Glasgow. Glasgow has the same relationship of working class families going picking, but strawberries. That's another example for how to act translocally through drinks production. Next slide. I have the feeling I have to go faster because I'm not Yeah? Okay. And then there we had quite a funny discussion around what's local, and we could use those drinks as a kind of measure your own localness. It can get really competitive when it comes to local. Our family has lived here like 16 generations. You're like, and? So it's a mix of questions of, some are very generic, others are very particular, because some things are particular to the local. Next slide. Every year we produce a drinks range, I also call it a family photo. And this image is quite important, and again, I think in terms of artistic practice, this is clearly about deciding very carefully what something looks like. This image for the neighborhood means a lot. It's a neighborhood that's officially described as culturally, socially, economically deprived. You know, all those images, you're really happy if you live somewhere and someone goes like, oh, you live in this like rubbish area, and everybody has this like idea of slums and things falling apart. So to produce an image that's positive and talks about a collective, and maybe a new collective identity, but also collective possibility, is really appreciated locally as well. So this is not just about branding and making the drinks look good. This is also about proposing different collective ways of identifying, self-identifying and representing. And the drinks range is basically a mapping of what's possible to pick, but what's also possible to make together. Next one. We sell the drinks, obviously. Next slide. There are some principles to company drinks which will stop us from becoming financially sustainable. One principle is that half of the drinks have to stay in the neighborhood. For the very simple reason that we can't or don't want to have a colonial practice where we go into a neighborhood with an interesting story and then sell all the products elsewhere for profit. So this is a very conscious decision, which is not a kind of profit-making business decision, but a very important one in order to locate and keep and reproduce certain systems. Half of the drinks go mainly into the art world, because that's where I'm from. It's kind of a country with money sometimes. And then the drinks are sold through shops, bars, events. And just to give you a kind of indication of what something costs, like a soda in Barking Dagenham costs €1, in West London £3.50. So that's kind of our recommended retail price across financial groups. Next one. So that's selling the drinks at freeze, art fair where we make an actual profit, mainly by selling alcohol, which is another principle that we have, that we don't want to generate most of our money through selling alcohol, which is a kind of slightly unethical thing to do. But also we work with a community with a huge Muslim percentage. It just would look really, really non-inclusive. Next slide. A lot of the drinks we're selling locally, then get concessions from the council, that we are the only bar, to give us a certain advantages in the market because we can't compete with Coca-Cola, and we just can't compete with like really, really cheap drinks. Next one. We have things like a honesty fridge in a library. Next slide. But we also have honesty fridges in exhibitions, and maybe again now bridging into artistic production, locating the project in different worlds. Company drinks quite often is in exhibitions, but it's in exhibitions, ideally it's in an exhibition with its different functions. So here it can be a drink, the drinks can be bought, the drinks are also displayed, they're also telling a story. There's also a film, it's also kind of a kind of representation of a certain social history, but of course it also has its own aesthetics and becomes its own thing. Next slide. Yeah, that's we actually were in a landscape exhibition. I mean, I can't thank you, the curator, enough for like, kind of imaginative curating. And yeah, that's a landscape of East London in the background.
Where was it?
In Compton Verney, a kind of very kind of classical, well, yeah, you get the idea. And they, just in terms of the absurdity of when you work in this kind of more ambiguous way. So the drinks for this cabinet were created by an art handler and then put on an art handling truck and driven there. They sold the same drinks in the shop at the same time, which then just gets put on a pallet and shipped you know, in a truck. We quite like this kind of contradiction. Next slide. Ah, that's what it stands for. Contradictions. Next slide. But we also just rings. And of course that is a kind of quite a useful common denominator when we want to talk about company drinks. The fact that we, at the end of the day, we are drink makes it also kind of a cheap way quite popular. Next slide. Just this idea of like, when I said earlier, opening things up instead of closing them down, I think also when it comes to art, I'd rather open up the possibilities for art to be used, seen, understood, exist, rather than closing it down. People go like, this can't be art. I think this is just the most boring question ever. And spectatorship is great, you know, we produce really beautiful things. We are in landscape exhibitions, but don't make this the only possibility for art to exist. Next one. And now really fast, we have a building since last year, a small building, next slide, in a park, next slide, where we have a small production kitchen where this kind of, those different activities around the sea actually come together in one place. We've been nomadic for the first 4 years, now we have a place, so there's a small production kitchen, next slide. There's a club room for like social events, next slide. And we have a growing club now, but also that's the place where the Center for Plausible Economies is located. And you will talk a little bit more about at the end, about the activities we did last year. Yes, thank you. And I think that's it, I'm finished. Yeah.
Super, thank you.
Jakieś pytania? Any questions?
And don't ask me why it's art.
Is it not?
Sure. Why not?
So maybe just one question, because maybe I missed it. You said that people go hop picking and strawberries, etc. But honestly, those fields where you pick it from, they are owned by somebody or is it owned by the company?
It's quite a mix. I didn't go into this detail, but it's a completely different mix of territories where we are picking from. So a lot of it is public parks. They're all owned by there's public space owned by the municipality. And of course we kind of talk to park rangers whether we can or cannot forage. That's foraging. And foraging can't be done for commercial purposes in Britain, but we can do it for a communal purpose. And we have simple rules. Some of the picking we do is gleaning. So we harvest after the commercial harvest has taken place. So for there's a current farmer, once they run the machines through, we hand pick what's left. With the hop farmer, he thinks we bring so much publicity to the whole topic around hop farming that he gives us all the hops for free. And some of the smaller growers we pay because we know how difficult it is to make any kind of profit with food on a small scale. So it's different deals with each different picking. But it's also private gardens, it's surplus that people donate to us. There's a bigger gleaning network, they glean on a larger scale, so they arrive with like 2 tons of apples. So it's quite a broad range of where the fruit comes from and where we pick. And each one is specific, and each one has a specific deal and agreement that we can do. And we have our own little growing area where they wanted to grow potatoes and like we can't make. Oh no, you can make. Yeah, anyway, let's not go into that. So they grow herbs, and we've developed a small tea range with like different tea blends.
Thank you for this presentation. I really like this project, and I have a question about the future of it, like how it's going to develop, and do you see yourself developing this project as long as possible? Because I suppose many people, this is the problem sometimes, they get offers, some kind of offers of developing another project, and you are here now, like you have a presentation, but these things need like really a lot of time to develop, so how, is it a problem and how do you see it?
Yeah, well, it's a problem. I think in business terms, we are, I don't want to make it too long, we are a relatively small operation. We might look bigger, but it's part of our sales pitch. We are a team of 4, we each work 2 days a week. We are all paid. We are normally financially sustainable until the end of the year. A third of our income comes from sales, but not necessarily sales of drinks, but we're also selling workshops and kind of consultation skills. 2/3 is funding, either through the arts, heritage. We're providing a lot of social service to the council, which in return gives us the building for free. So it's kind of quite a diverse economy that makes it resilient, but it constantly needs to be really, really looked after. 70% of new businesses in London go bankrupt within 2 years, so that tends to be like a real success. Because we also have a very kind of conservative way of running our own economy. You know, there's no debts. We kind of quite carefully spend our money and make sure we're not running out of it. But it's a constant, and we were talking about it a lot because a lot of our time goes into running all those things, which are now quite established and popular. And we can't just go, oh no, we don't go more picking anymore. You know. So we constantly lack capacity to grow certain ideas. We don't necessarily want to grow as an organization, but for example, colleagues of ours now kind of pretty much copy that idea in Northern Italy. So yeah, there's a kind of idea of replicating rather than us massively growing up. I think it would be really amazing if we could become more of an employer, offer full-time employment to local residents, but we're a little bit far away from that.
Can you talk a bit about the question of scale and expansion? Because I think that's where it's also important. Like we were talking about this, or like I remember this meeting with a person who is an entrepreneur working drinks business.
Yeah. I mean, we've done a lot of we've kind of run through quite a lot of scenarios, and everybody assumes that we can grow bigger by selling more drinks. Not the case. Because also most drinks companies make their money from something else, yeah? Like most companies, a lot of companies make their money from not what you think they make their money from. So we've costed a kind of increase of drinks and how much we will earn from that. And it's not worth it because food is too cheap. We have other scenarios how we can increase capacity, but we don't have the staff capacity to do that at the moment.
Yeah, but I thought not only business-wise, but also as an artist, like to stick to one project is very difficult nowadays.
I only do this 2 days a week. I only work on company drinks 2 or 3 days a week.
All right.
I have.
And do you do other projects in?
Yeah, many other projects.
Okay.
But with the same kind of takes an idea. We have a school and a shop, and you know.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I know that you explained a bit how you pay to the fruit pickers, but it's very interesting to me. How did you how have you find them? I mean, like the process of finding fruit pickers.
The people come picking?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, if I think of skills I have, I think one skill I have is like being able to quite carefully listen to local advice. So if I arrive in Barking and Dagenham and say we want to start this thing, then I really kind of know how to listen to people who know who might be interested and then follow this up and quite carefully then invite people to come along. But the invitation is very open.
Were there any sorry, we need to it's all recorded.
Were there any certain spaces you looked
Oh yeah, the coach trip to 50 people, that's it. But if we do
also you recruit through local library, right?
Oh yeah, we like the hop picking trip. We go through the local archive where a lot of elderly people are. The family trips through the libraries. By now we know quite a lot of organizations. It's not an area where people are queuing up to do something that's kind of green and local and organic. So our main invitation is more towards the social and the benefit maybe from going away for a day.
Maybe could you just explain also this economics of volunteer labor, because I guess that's a quite important thing.
Yeah, I mean, when I said earlier that something we're hoping to practice is that you can come into the project based on different interests, but also that your role maybe can change. So some people enter as volunteers and they want to stay volunteers. Some people only come for the Christmas party for the free beer, that's fine. Some people like now are part-time members of our team. So a kind of change of roles, how you relate to it, is possible, and that's very, very important. So not everybody has to remain a volunteer for the rest of their life. We also have a youth program where some of the young people then become work on the bars with us, selling the drinks. So there's kind of different ways, paid, unpaid, to be connected or part of it.
I'm wondering whether you can explain a bit more about this one-to-one scale, the concept that you are using, and then second one is you showed this image of the photo of the group of pickers whose 90% voted for Brexit, and that's quite interesting. So what it means to collaborate with them, and then to what company dreams or this collaboration actually does, and what is kind of boundaries and what is the potential? Can we think together about that?
What was the first question?
The one-to-one scale.
The one-to-one scale. I think maybe you do that. No, so the one-to-one scale means that this is of course a critique of mainstream economics and our public space is being narrowed down to become quite consumer-driven, but it critiques and responds to that in the scale of one-to-one. So it's not a kind of comment on a page, it's not an image in a gallery that talks about the story, it kind of enacts it on the scale, on the real scale.
Yeah, we have this the motto, talk the talk and walk the walk, right? So not only that it's not only about the theory, but you try to implement it in some sort of practice. But it also comes from this usership lexicon by Stephen Wright, in which it denotes a kind of art which is not only a concept of something, but it actually realizes this potential in social practice.
But that's also the limitation. So of course it's about what's immediately possible as an actuality, and you start, and maybe that's also where you then hit the limitations, because our one-to-one at the moment is a certain scale.
Okay, so then there is a question about, the second question was about politics and this
yeah,
friction.
I think, I can be personally extremely offended. You want me out of here, blah, blah, blah. But that's not the point. The point is how we then find a practice around this disagreement, yeah? So with Keep It Complex, we run seminars about how to talk to people you disagree with, because I think that's actually a culture that many of us, or it's not practiced so much anymore, but probably very, very valuable. And then with the hop pickers, I don't want to teach anyone what they should think. It's just not my style. Oh no, I did it a bit about the art. Yeah, with art I'm quite arrogant. But otherwise, normally not so much. So I don't want to tell anyone you shouldn't have voted. So we did a film in the year of the referendum where we took the former hop pickers to meet the people who are picking today, mainly from Eastern Europe, Romania, Bulgaria, and then explained that this has to do with mobility. They were attractive pickers at the time because they were close to the fields. Now it's Ryanair that allows others to come to the fields. So we kind of have moments within the project where we talk about the realities of the politics as well, but without preaching. If it changes people's opinion, I don't know. We made a sour Brexit drink. And now we're kind of preparing for a real Brexit drink, which will be so expensive and so disgusting.
We call it Boris.
I'm going to lose my citizenship over that.
You can call it Boris.
No, certain names which just not be repeated.
Okay.
I stop now.
Thank you very much, Katrin. Thank you once again. Very inspiring. So let me invite Binna to the stage. Binna Choi is director of Casco Art Institute working for the Commons, formerly Casco Office for Art, Design and Theory in Utrecht, the Netherlands, since 2008. She conceived and co-developed with the team and numerous others a long-term artistic research projects like Domestic Revolution, it was 2009-2013, and Composing the Commons, a 3-year interdisciplinary and artistic research program, which happened between 2013 and 2016. Has been part of the faculty of Dutch Art Institute, Masters of Fine Art program in Arnhem, and working for and with a trans-local network arts collaboratory since 2013, and a co-founding member of European Networks of Art Organizations cluster. Binna, thank you very much for being with us, and am I needed to change the slides, or?
I let you rest.
Okay.
Kuba, thank you for organizing this. Also, thank you for her Biennale team for organizing and showing us this, like, what is possible anew with Biennale. It's really encouraging and exciting, I must say. And also thank you for being here today. So Kuba asked me to talk about Casco as a feminist institution of the commons, and I just want to say that Casco is not really feminist institution of the commons, but it's more feminist decolonial art institutions that is working for the commons. This means we are not just institution of the commons, but I have to emphasize we are also public art institution. So public and art, I think, have to be a bit highlighted in this. This feminist, so decolonial art institution working for the commons, it's outcome of like reframing the institution, which was formerly called Casco, Office for Art Design and Theory. So this reframing took place, it took like about 2.5 years, and then relaunch took place about a year ago, so 9 June. So we're going to have like 1 year anniversary in 2 weeks. And history of Casco as a entity started in 1990. So next year we are becoming 30 years old. And this is the invitation card in the size of A4 for this relaunch of Casco, which we present 3 questions out of like about 25 questions around art and the commons, which we collected from the close community members around us. Instead of sharing with you the process or background story about how this reframe happened, I hope that I can give you an idea of what was before and then what was new. New are also very much in the process of becoming. And in that, I think I have to start with what we mean with the word commons. So, in fact, this notion of the commons is not so new to Casco. It started emerging when we were working on the project Grand Domestic Revolution. We wanted to see domestic space and domestic labor as a site for collective intervention and collective practice of art and the social. But then at the time we didn't know, like, actually we were just wondering what it means. We start using it, but what is that? So after this project Grand Domestic Revolution, we decided to make the program as the research trajectory about the definition of the commons and the strategy of the commons. And this map is one of the outcomes of this research. And then in most simplistic term, that we define commons as a collective resource that are co-managed by self-organizing communities. And then here we also put the condition that where maintenance, care, sharing, cooperation, and diversity are of highest value. So this is like directing for the movement of change that we think quite urgent and necessary in time we live. But this commons and collective resource is not just existing in an island separately, but it is, I think, crucial to recognize the commons in the regime, or in the binary regime of the public and private. In other words, the regime of the nation or city-state and the market, mostly neoliberal market. So commons is kind of emerging in between or oppressed in between, taken away, sometimes exploding, or diminishing and re-emerging. So we kind of bring these commons to the surface with this map. But then there is also many voices saying that commons, if we start looking at commons only resource and object, that's quite dangerous. Then dangerous in a sense that it can be easily taken away by others, like public power or private power. Why it's dangerous? Let me skip that part. But it is important that it is important to recognize commons as the ongoing process of doing, where relations are constantly negotiated, renegotiated, maintained, and cared. I wouldn't go deeper into this, and at the bottom what you see, like in this, what is it, the check, how do you call it? A different kind of strategy, approach, and refining the practice of the commons.
Possibly people cannot really see it. Maybe you can...
Militant commons, under commons, uncommon, reproductive commons. I'm sure there are more. And then this is a model drawn by Michel Bauwens as a part of the founder of the peer-to-peer organization based in Brussels. This is the model to show actually how commons can operate in the scale of city. I believe this model is drawn based on the peer-to-peer foundation's research into city of Ghent in Belgium. And what is notable here is that commons, again, doesn't exist as an island or autonomous island, but in partnership, in relation with other existing structure, including public. And then it involves infrastructure organizations and initiatives, and also, of course, the economy. And then I'd like to bring these two diagrams again to find a place or a position of art and art institutions. Because as drawing this diagram, personally, and as looking at this diagram of polygovernance by Michel Bauwens and peer-to-peer foundation, I tend to think that art is actually dealing with these four commons. It is, but the more we work on and working for the commons, we are realizing our position is really tiny in this little heart. It has to be far smaller. But then this relation between these big circle and then heart is something I think we are dealing with. So this relation between big circle and heart can be huge or opposite. So the heart is art, especially visual art. In our case, it's just tiny part of the cultural commons. So it will be really a big misunderstanding or like a megalomaniac to think that we can actually cultivate for commons practice. And there are many, many other organizations and initiatives and institutions that are actually making commons possible in bigger scale. But then I think, again, it's our role, for example, in Michel Bauman's diagram, he put knowledge in the social realm as also important part of the matrix of common operating in city scale, but this doesn't address culture and let alone art. And I think for us, in order to sustain and continue thrive our practice, it's important to indicate there is this tiny, however important place for art and culture. So now I'm going into this before and after, and that is going to actually make use of this iceberg economy diagram. We all learn from Katherine and the community economy is network. And I cannot not think of this melting iceberg. The polar bears losing their habitat, coming into the city to chase away the people who are living in order to get food. What is the core aspect of this iceberg is there is hierarchical structure. Again, I could say maybe binary structure of economy, even our society, which value, which make something, little part of it visible and other invisible. Hence, devalued or undervalued. But then iceberg is melting, and what's going to happen to this binary or iceberg structure? What shape that we are imagining and practice? There comes also, I think, the role of art and culture. So, in a way, this portrait of before and after of Castro, we say from also especially using this iceberg model, can be said is seen from perspective of diverse economies. But these diverse economies of the art institution address funding and other resources to sustain the work and organization and program structure. So this is a picture of our diverse economy that includes like funding, public funding regime. So what you can see, actually this diagram we made when we applied for Mondrian Fund. So there is Ministar, and that was actually that used to be our biggest funding resource, which we have been operating without for last 1.5 years. So I'm better to read this one. So this is now. So this is what used to be until 2017, and then this is now. So we lost the money from Mondrian Fund, and also it's getting harder and harder to get support from European Union since it changed into this creative industry model by calling itself as a creative Europe. But then there's other funding came in, Foundation for Art Initiative, who actually the value what is not so much valued by other funding. And then co-production, mutual support, contribution to symposium, forum, and class connected to teaching have been taking place more and more in our economy. And next to that, study and unlearning process. So each of our team having more space for study and unlearning. And the red circle is something that we are thinking but didn't realize that is having different energy and having generous aunt and uncle, having we have like our current premise is public property, so we pay far less rent, but we could have more spacious. We could have a bigger space. Or what about going nomad, for instance? And then organization. This is how it used to be. So on the left column, there you see functions that are on the regular contract. On the right, on the freelance space. The number indicates the hour, not hour, the day. So 0.9 means 4 days. If the whole working week is 5 days. So in total, none of the actually team member worked in full time. It's very, but so in total, it's like you can say 4 person. And 4 person, and how can you say? Like about 4 person in full time. And then next to that, there's a freelance position. That's what we used to have. And now, despite of the change of the amount of the funding that we have, so with the absence of Mondrian fund, amount actually has been diminished, but we could able to keep the team, number of the team as used to be, but with a change of its function and names and the position. Director, I am the director, and director remains as the director. We got Yolandi van der Heide, who used to be head of publishing, promoted to deputy director. So doing or working for the common doesn't mean that we diminish or we remove the hierarchy, but we consider hierarchy really carefully, and then we go very transparent about hierarchy, connecting that to responsibility and experience and capability. And other position is head of diverse economy. So instead of having financial accountant or fundraiser, we decided to have function for head of diverse economies, who's actually taking economy as one of the main focus points. And other important aspect of this organizational change is awareness of differences. So one of the questions from one of the main questions that we presented and shared for launch of Casco Art Institute for Working for the Commons was this: how do gender, class, race, and culture, and we could add more like age and ability, configure in the commons. And we start addressing the racial difference and certain pain that attached to everyday racism going on, and also gender issue, etc. But here, when I say we, I want to put emphasis on that despite of the habit of seeing the team as we, it is really important to unlearn that way of seeing, to see we as for ecosystem or the complex field of various individuals and communities, and that we are trying to ensure through what we call study lines. So if these urban commons, natural commons, social commons, culture and knowledge commons, if those are like some major area of the commons, we kind of we translating them or into more fine line as we approach with practice of art. So they each study line has very curious name which need further explanation, and the way that the study line is decided is whether there is constituency, whether there is concerned community around us who follow this study line together. And as I say also, we are following that these study lines really reflect our past trajectories as well, the legacy, heritage, and lessons and privilege attached to those lines. So this is kind of how we picture the community or ecosystem around Casco. And this would be also basis for new program structure. So what you see here is again many other diagrams and models of the structure of the program. So I think this one is like even before 2014, and something that remained is the artist-led project and long-term artistic research project. And then as we start learning about and studying about community economies, we start looking at the program structure along with the organization, actually from this iceberg model. So what is visible and what is valued and what is not. And then this is one way that we look at. So we realize there is this kind of hierarchical structure in our program and operations. So how we can make that more holistic, how we can make it, how we can break this binary. And so this was an outcome. And as you might already notice, although image changed, the actual operation didn't change so much, program didn't change so much. So it's more about recognition and awareness. And another model is this one, which was drawn based on this model. This express more kind of philosophy and a theory of art and art organization that indicate that we are looking at art from the perspective of action and body and kira. So art as a tool for action, but in performing and practicing art for action, it's important to see art is made through body. And kira is a Japanese word, means twinkling. And here comes a bit challenging part that we are dealing with now, also in relation to the practice like company drinks and one-to-one scale. We just learn that this, like, what is aesthetic quality or aesthetic potential that often we name as beautiful. which still very secret term goes around in art world or in the experience and in encounter of art. But here all these diagrams are actually not used any longer. So this is a latest diagram that we drew and then abandoned, and then why we are working heavily on bringing the study aspect, that each team member of the organization follow a study line, and each study lines also involve constituency, community. Here you don't see the word study or study lines, and instead we brought project, but something new is this ethic, and then ecosystem. But then we felt really uncomfortable with this project. And then also how to deal with all this broad ecosystem and how to address ethics as an art organization. I think these questions also heavily hit us as we didn't manage to continue to get the support from the Mondrian Fund. So this is what we have now. Based on the study lines on around art and the commons, so main and regular program, and we reinforce the exhibition program, presentation, showing art that is beautiful, but also not. And then quarterly study meetings, and then the assembly. So all these three types of activities and presentations are for the public. But then here, they are all public, and they are all in the regime of presentation, which is important in dealing with the regime of the public and the private. But what is not, or what is rather hidden, yet we are consciously practicing, is that each type of activity, exhibition and study meeting and assembly, are the moments of organizing and producing the commons, and cultivating and taking care of the relations, and while situating art and mediating art within those relations of the commons. And other one is, so next to main and regular program, we also continuously run extramural program, and it's continuously, but it's quite irregular and flexible, organic and wide, and taking place outside of the institutional world. So next to, in parallel to this diverse economy, for us, notion of diverse art is something that we can work with. This thinking and practicing of diverse art is taking place in thinking in the matrix of all kinds of different relationships between art and the commons. So how art actually could serve for the commons, and what kind of practice of commons are so fine to be art. So also exhibition is not showing art for the commons, but also art of the commons, and what would be kind of exhibition tactics and technique, etc. Also to be studied and practiced. So eventually, this would be kind of an image of feminist or decolonial art institution that is working for the commons. That would it would become part of a certain ecosystem through this layered process that is not binarily structured. So from team to communities and ecosystem, and to make the public effect or making relation with publicness or the public. And this is the last part. So this is the brochure image of the first assembly that we organized last year, named Tiger Elephants in the Room. We were questioning a lot whether we would have membership or member for CASCO. And after long deliberation, we decided not, and rather have participants. So it is to it is a way of dealing with it's a way of working for the commons while dealing with the institution of the public, we being institution of public. Because when you have membership, it immediately creates a recognizable boundary of the commons that might diminish our capacity to work and relate to the public. And other aspect that we consider is that instead of having this identitarian approach to membership, making the practice of commoning more in contributory way. So as you taking part in and contributing, that you are a member of that moment, but you can also choose to withdraw from that moment. So this is the more kind of question. So in order to support and facilitate this more open and contributory commoning process, or commoning art institution, commoning art institution, we thought it's necessary to develop a digital platform. So this platform doesn't exist yet, we just purchased the domain. Again, it is to think of how to open the boundary of art institutions and boundary of commoning, and as to situate art as broader and multiple as possible, instead of locating art only within the wall of art institution, like art center or museums. And another reason why we are working on this digital platform is to find a way of other economic system by perhaps using the technological model like blockchain. How that is possible is to be debated. Well, yeah, let me just end here.
Thank you. Is there any questions?
Can you say more about this?
Sorry, I just need to give you a...
What did you mean by unlearning?
Thank you for the question. While actually talking about CASCO, its reframing process, actually main topic that I've been talking has been unlearning, but actually I skipped that part totally, so it's very new content of presentation that I'm trying today. But with unlearning, so you remember that the art and culture sphere is located in this knowledge sphere. So I see, we see art as a form of learning. You can be say it's an aesthetic education. While it's aesthetic education, you can say it also becoming much more cognitive and intellectualized over last several decades. Unlearning. So this notion that we got to tackle with artist Annette Krauss, who come with a proposition that in order to learn, actually we have to unlearn. So the reason is that the knowledge is so embedded and embodied, and this becomes habit, which means that it becomes something that you can't recognize any longer. And often that knowledge or habit that coming from knowledge perform with privilege or certain violence. So if we are to learn something new, that we need to work on unlearning. So she come with a method of taking different sites for unlearning, including cycling, so unlearn how to cycle. And other side was taken as an art organization and taking Costco as a specific case.
Can you, for example, a bit expand on this unlearning, for example, the division of labor inside of the institution? Because that's a good example, and also it relates to this new names that you were giving to different positions, right?
Right. So in case of Costco, unlearning started with discussion what we want to unlearn as an art organization. So this involved the whole team, also including the interns, together with Annette Krauss, and then what we arrived at is that we need to unlearn being busy. And then we start analyzing what actually underlying structure for creating this sense of business, which entailing also sense of anxiety and nervousness. And this point of arrival, of course, came with also question of how we actually practice the commons. As we say, we are developing knowledge and learning about the commons. And sense of business or being busy make you actually prevent from commoning. So, so this underlying structure for general business is that we are also habituating the logic of productivity. So we keep producing exhibition or project and the accompanying knowledge. And what's at stake and what is taken hostage by this logical productivity is the reproductivity. So coming back to relations, that even like saying hi to your colleague coming a little bit late, but also even relating to artworks that you are producing as an artist or as a producer or curator. So we have been developing various exercises to unlearn this productivity. I'm losing a bit like a track. You asked me about division of labor, and division of labor and power. So, like within the team, there are those who are working on keep producing, and then those who keep doing errand and fixing, and taking care, which include cleaning our office. So this express the existing kind of hierarchical structure of labor that we see in a broader social field, taking instance women's labor or labor of domestic worker. So we started kind of collect. We started weekly collective cleaning as our exercise. Other exercises involve reading together, studying together, which led into this idea of study lines and then different organizational structures.
Is there any other question? Okay, thank you very much. So now let me introduce Katrin Gibson to the stage. And Katrin Gibson is internationally known for her research on rethinking economies as sites of ethical action. She tried as a human geographer with expertise in political economy, and with her collaborator for over 30 years, the late Professor Julie Graham developed a distinctive approach to economic geography drawing on feminism, post-structuralism and action research. The diverse economies research programs they initiated has become a vibrant subfield of study within the social sciences. In the late 1990s, the collective authorial voice of J.K. Gibson Graham led a critique of capitalocentric thinking that was blocking the emergence of economic possibility. The End of Capitalism as We Knew It, a feminist critique of political economy, was published in 1996, a book, and was republished in 2006. And she co-established Community Economies Collective, an ongoing collaboration between academic and community researchers and activists in Australia, North America, Europe and Southeast Asia. The goal of the collective is to theorize, discuss, represent, and ultimately enact new visions of economy.
I need you to help me with the Polish version. How?
It is on the
I just don't know how to make it to the full thing. How many people does it take to make PowerPoint work? 3.
3.
Too many? Okay.
But at least it works. Katrin, thank you very much for coming. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you for inviting me. And it's 7:10 in Australia in the morning, so I'm just waking up. I just arrived yesterday. So, good timing. It's ready for the cup of tea. I'm hoping you've still got energy for ideas at this stage of the night, at this time of your stomach, needing dinner. Because I wanted to talk a little bit about, I guess, the ideas that have given rise to this idea of diverse economies that both Katherine and Binna have drawn on to some extent in their work. And so I want to talk a little bit about how do we start to imagine and enact post-capitalist possibilities, which I see the kind of work that you're doing, both of you, trying to do that and doing that, in fact, and seeing art as a place where there's an opening, as Katherine said at the beginning. It's sort of a space of freedom to some extent to explore and experiment in a way that in many ways other aspects of life don't allow. So I guess one of the questions that Julie and I started to think about, as having been trained as political economists, very much schooled in Marxian political economy, and of course the old adage of Marxism was that you understood the world in order to change it, but we felt that the more we were understanding the world, the more it was not changing, and we were in fact just dotting the I's and crossing the T's on this incredible thing called capitalism that was always dominating us. So what was in fact standing in the way of thinking was a particular vision of economy as this system, as this machine that was controlling the space of possibility, that everything we did was constrained by a structure that was organising our economy. So we wrote a book in 1996 called The End of Capitalism as We Knew It, a feminist critique of political economy. And this was published by Blackwell, and I thought it had a very Germanic look at that time, like it was something out of the German Marxist party. But there was Sisyphus rolling this stone up the hill, which was our theorising of capitalism, always for it to come rolling back down on top of us. And I was much more impressed with the Turkish translation of The End of Capitalism in 2011, where they somehow found some wonderful old environmental poster, I think. There was capitalism again. There's the machinic robot gobbling up the resources of the world, gobbling up people, belching out the smoke. And Julie and I were the Davids throwing our slingshots, stones into the system. The Goliath was there. I found out later on that apparently throwing stones and having slingshots is a very common aspect of activism in Turkey and other parts of the Middle East. So I didn't realise that. So, you know, we've been doing this for a long time, and it's still, I think many of us have this sense that capitalism is there with encompassing power, with generalisable dynamics and enlarged spaces of agency, and we just have to think about the way we so easily revert to the idea that neoliberal capitalism is the problem that everything we do faces up against. So this is a representational issue for us, and we used a number of tools, thinking tools, to try and get ourselves out of this capitalist space. And one of them was this idea, challenging the idea that the vision of economy is occupied by the space of capitalist relations. So where things like what is real work is wage labour, what is real production is the production of commodities for a market by private enterprises based on a vision of private property, somehow ordained as the only way to deal with stuff, in which this kind of economy is where real technological innovation takes place, where real inventiveness is, and of course driven by a kind of entrepreneurial spirit. So that notion of economy has been colonised by a particular set of relationships. And not only that, but our notion of what it is to be a subject, to be an economic subject, is colonised by a vision of economic subjectivity, where one has to be an employee, and as an employee you're interested in always maximising your returns through getting higher wages, or you could be, if you're lucky, you inherited wealth or whatever, you can be a business owner, in which case your motivations are to make more profit. Otherwise, all of us are consumers, and somehow our motivation there is to get cheaper and cheaper goods. Oh, I just bought this and it was so cheap, isn't that fantastic? You know, that kind of sensibility. And we're all aiming to be property owners, where we'll make capital gains out of our investments, more private returns from investments. And if you're unemployed, well, you just need to get a job. So I'm sure many of you would identify with these kind of subject positions that constrain what it means to be an economic subject. So our interest was in what can we do to get out of that kind of vision, and what strategies could we use to reframe the economy, think about ourselves as economic subjects in different ways. And the strategies that we used and continue to use, and there's many others as well, but were initially a reframing of a feminist reframing of the economy, and then various thinking tools such as deconstruction and queering. And I just want to give you a very brief kind of insight into those. And I think ultimately the role of art plays an interesting role in our work, and it's been picked up by artists in an interesting way, which is kind of curious to me. So, of course, you know, here's the old original reframing kind of question. Is it a vase or is it two faces? Is it a capitalist economy, or is it a landscape of economic heterogeneity? And what is it that allows one to see the bottom rather than the top. And of course the image of the iceberg, which has come up already, is one of the images we've used to try and produce an initial kind of deconstruction, because what is seen as the real economy is this tip of the iceberg: wage labour, production for a market of commodities in private enterprise. But of course what is sustaining most of the world, and many of us, all of us in fact, are a whole range of other types of activities that you could also conceptualise as part of an economy, part of what creates livelihoods, what keeps people alive, etc. So in this kind of framing of capitalism as the only economy, of course we can see a kind of dominant term, the dominance of the term A, against which everything is not A. So capitalism, as I said, is all these kinds of activities, but of course we know that academics and practitioners have studied all these other kinds of things like local currencies, voluntary sector, care economy, social economy, alternative finance, household sector work, indigenous kin-based economies, gifting in the informal sector, and no matter how much work is done on the prevalence of these practices, the fact that most people in the world survive through some form of subsistence or small-scale agriculture, which is often for use rather than for exchange. But all of those practices are seen as always subordinate or as non-dominant or as not able to construct a viable, reproducible economy. It's only this that can. So here we see the classic sort of Derridian kind of vision of the dominant term against which everything else is always lacking or is subordinate. And of course, feminists took up this kind of deconstruction to analyse the way in which women were always defined in relation to this dominant figure of the masculine, the male. And woman is always wanting in some ways or subordinate to that kind of vision of the male as the universal subject. So we took this idea of phallogocentrism, which had been developed by feminist post-structuralists to think about how do we start to re-theorise what woman is when we're living in a world in which this kind of dominance structure is the structure of meaning. And we transpose that into thinking about the economy. Why is it that this capitalist entity is seen as the dominant way of thinking of economy, against which everything else is seen as somehow an opposite or subordinate or a complement or existing within the orbit of, but never having its own productivity, its own generative nature? So that was a first kind of deconstructive move for which you can start to say, well, let's undo that binarism, not accept that it's part of the real, but part of an imaginary, really, part of a symbolic order that we work with. Another strategy then was to start to queer the economy, start to challenge the way certain kinds of relationships were lined up as a dominant structure and others weren't, or were lined up only as this subordinate or other. And here the work of theorists like Eve Sedgwick, who wrote queering her book, The Epistemology of the Closet, and has led the kind of thinking around queering, which is really trying to undo the lining up that takes place, where economy, ideology, subjectivity and everything is kind of put into one kind of structure. And for instance, if you look at the way in which the heteronormative family puts together all these kinds of relationships, naming, property relationships, sexual relationships, etc., etc. Her work was to say, let's start de-aligning these things. Let's start queering the way that things don't actually match up. And it's that kind of thinking that led to the politics that has seen now, much more acceptance of queer relationships and in fact even state, support for same-sex marriage, for instance. So what Eve Sedgwick's work also pointed to, though, was I think something that many social theorists had started to notice, that there was not just a kind of theoretical systems of thinking that were stopping us from thinking of alternatives or thinking in other ways, but there was also an embodied practice to theory. And what Eve talked about was the paranoid sensibility, and I think Bruno Latour has also talked about the kind of conspiratorial nature of most social theorising, where most of the stance of the thinker is to be sceptical, suspicious, detached, and the affect of that kind of thinking, if you think of of radical leftist thinking, is to increase fear and anxiety, but in the search for mastery, for causal explanation, for the ultimate critique, where you can kind of pierce the veil and see where power really lies. And this is a kind of strong theorising that many of us have grown up with, that it's very hard to step outside of, because as soon as you do, you feel like you're not doing strong. You're not coming up with a new vision of how the world is structured, etc. So to actually open ourselves up to a different kind of thinking, to this kind of more reparative thinking, more open, with an open stance, the more trusting relationship to the others or to the unknown, where an affect might be of hope or love, where the practice is one of exploration and description, refusing to know too much, and to de-exoticize power, to see power as always around, not just structured in a certain way. This was a kind of a weak theory that Eve Sedgwick talked about, building on work from Sylvan Tompkins and other psychoanalysts. And we brought that into our thinking to say, how do we start to approach these experiments that have always coexisted with capitalist social relations, experiments in living differently and organising economies differently, with this open stance, rather than always seeing it as not successful enough, not matching up, not being durable, just like capitalism is. So this is the kind of ways that we tried to unlearn, I suppose. This is a form of unlearning, forcing yourself to look for heterogeneity rather than everything being the same or dominant, forcing yourself to look for the de-aligning of economic relationships and entities and objects and so on. It is a process of trying to be a different kind of knowing subject, and certainly a different kind of academic subject. And what we developed was the kind of notion of three different kinds of politics, that we needed a different language to talk about economies differently, and that meant we needed to inhabit different kinds of subjectivity, which could lead to different kinds of collective action. And this was the kind of argument we put forward in our second book in 2006. The politics of language is very much tied up in thinking about economies as diverse, as inherently heterogeneous, and in fact talking about a more than capitalist economy, economies in which there's more than capitalist relations. And this is where this idea of the iceberg has come in. And so, this is, if we sort of abandon the binarism and just look at all these things floating around together, we can start to see how we have a more heterogeneous economy, but we need a way of talking about it, and a language that doesn't keep allowing this top, above the waterline vision of economy dominate. And so the diverse economies kind of framing was really just a way of actually being more systematic about these kinds of practices. So systematically trying to look at all the different kinds of labour that people perform, that are paid in different ways or that are unpaid, that contribute to livelihoods. So, whether it's reciprocal labour or payment in kind, or all the different kinds of unpaid labour that coexist with wage labour. Again, looking at all the different kinds of transactional interchanges that take place outside of the formal commodity market trade, supply and demand driven kind of markets, all the different markets that are where goods and services are exchanged according to other kinds of ethics, and all the kinds of non-market exchanges that give rise to well-being, gift-giving. And note here, this kind of inventory of diversity includes things that are perhaps not that supportable, or that some things you don't like, under the underground market, or in the case of slave labour. But it's really just saying this is here, this is still with us. It's not like slavery is something of the past. it's actually still part of our world. So let's look at the diverse forms of practice that coexist. It's not, we're not making any kind of normative argument at this point. It's just a really way of kind of documenting and inventorying the different kinds of relationships that exist. So in terms of enterprise or businesses, again, we can see a whole range of what we might call alternative capitalist businesses where different kinds of ethics come to bear, or the whole range of non-capitalist enterprises. And similarly, when it comes to thinking of property, we can think of other kinds of private property that's not purely the kind of pure private property for individual gain, such as state-managed assets or customary land or community land trusts. And of course, a lot of property is still under open access, which leads to all sorts of issues we'll come to in a minute. And then when it comes to finance, we can think of all the different kinds of finance and ways of accessing savings and investment, as well as non-market forms. So this is just a kind of a beginning of a language of diverse economy that people in action research projects around the world have identified with, because it's that people can then situate themselves in an economy rather than seeing themselves as outside of it because they don't have a job or they work at home, for instance. And what Ellie Rutherford has used the actual, that's her sitting inside the iceberg there in a fish and chip shop, I think, of people in Glasgow mapping out their activities to start this work of, I guess, rethinking economy. And the iceberg has been reframed as or represented as a floating coconut in work that we've done in Melanesia and the Pacific, where the idea of an iceberg and coral, we had polar bears, were a bit foreign. So here we were using it to actually look at the gendered division of labour, and so getting people to map out all the different practices that they were involved in, but most of them were sort of underneath the waterline in terms of formal economic practices. So that kind of language just opens up the way, the pathway, I think, for thinking about oneself as a different kind of economic subject, and in particular a decentered subject, a subject that is involved in multiple economic activities, and different kind of subject in terms of the knowing subject, and perhaps a different academic as well as an artistic subject. So here, instead of thinking about economic subjectivity only in these terms, we can start to think of the kind of economic subjectivity that one performs as a parent or a carer or a volunteer or an artist or a cooperator, a self-employed person or a social entrepreneur. And of course, many of us are many of these things, and we occupy these different subject positions in our daily lives, and are hailed into different kinds of constituencies according to these membership of these different kinds of positions. But given that, then it is possible to start to think about how we might cultivate different kinds of subjectivities, economic subjectivities. Because in order to occupy a different economic world, we have to see ourselves in it, we have to think ourselves into it. We have to see ourselves as ethically oriented towards making decisions, making political decisions as to what kind of subject we want to be. And I think this is, I guess, some of the issues that many of you, and we had a discussion earlier this afternoon around trying to act in a cooperative way as artists. How do you start to think yourself into that kind of position? And of course, what we've been arguing is that we should be using our theory to help us do that we need theoretical work to see openings, to actually do the kinds of rich description, the inventorying that we need to do to start to de-exoticize power, not see it only in the hands of certain structures or people, and refuse to know too much in order to open up ourselves to surprise. And then I guess that leads to the kind of actions and collective actions that we might take, in which all research, as we would see it, all art probably too, is performative. It all is trying to construct the world in a different way. And in our work we've done many different kinds of action research projects to try and enact what we call community economies, which is the more normative moment. How do we start to put ethics at the centre of our economic lives? And this was the topic of a more popular book that we wrote, Julie before she died began the book, and Jenny Cameron and Stephen Healy have joined me in writing this book, which is really about an ethical guide for transforming our communities. It's called Take Back the Economy, and has been translated into Korean and into Spanish by Colombian colleagues, and most recently into Finnish, which is an interesting mixture of languages. Go figure. Anyway, partly because of doing this work, we embarked on a whole interesting project in the countries where the translators of Take Back the Economy were located, drawing on the translators, drawing on community organisations, and also artists to redraw a diverse economy in different ways. And so we did workshops in Finland, in Korea. Binna helped me in Korea, and some other. Actually, Katherine, was supposed to go to Finland, but it was anyway. Jenny went and did work, and in Colombia, another artist went with Stephen to do this work with communities on redrawing the economy. And I'll just quickly look at some of the images that came out, which I think this idea of the iceberg is really just an idea about visibility and invisibility. It's just a way to start to get a different conversation going. And in Korea, people came up with this idea of the gilded cage as a way of thinking about finance. And then underneath that gilded cage was all these other kinds of freedoms of community finance, community currencies, time banking, crowdfunding. It was a way that the organisations that we brought together started to map out their activities. This was another group of people doing community media where they represented the iceberg as a cactus with a very big kind of dendritic root system, and they were looking at the kind of very prickly kind of mainstream media, the mobile phone as being this kind of interesting kind of liminal space that allowed for both mainstream and unmainstream kinds of media. And in Colombia, people used all sorts of local products in the rural area to try and document the kinds of issues that were happening for them on how they were trying to build ethical economies in a very colonised landscape where international flower industry had taken over their agricultural area, and women who were ex-flower workers were trying to set up community gardens and other kinds of agriculture to generate new livelihoods. So this idea of redrawing the economy as a beginning is a way of starting to imagine and operate with a different language of economy and create different subjectivities and enact different kinds of collective actions. So in Take Back the Economy, we tried to reframe this diverse economy in terms of a set of ethical concerns. For instance, rather than talking about just labour practices, we talked about what are the kinds of work that's involved in surviving well. What's the way in which you put together different kinds of labour to come up with a way of having a livelihood that allows you to survive well? How do we think about business as being a place to actually generate surplus, generate wealth that can be then distributed in certain ways? How do we think about transactions in terms of encounter? And what kind of ethical encounters do we want to participate in? And how do we think about property in terms of this idea of commoning and sharing and making and sharing what sustains us? And instead of thinking about finance, we can think about investing in futures. So this was a kind of a new language of ethical economic practice that put together a set of concerns: surviving well, distributing surplus, ethical encounters, commoning, investing in futures, and consuming sustainably, which cuts across all of these things. And in the Take Back the Economy, we used a whole range of different tools and mechanisms to try and they're really tools that people can use to start to unpack, what is the busyness of their life? What kinds of labour are they kind of drawing on to make their living? And why is it of a certain kind? How could it be different? What kinds of well-being is created from that kind of busyness? What kinds of encounters do we have through trade with others? What kind of commoning practices have happened in the past? What uncommoning has taken place, and what new kinds of commoning can happen? So looking at this generational yardstick to try and map out, it was interesting talking about consumer cooperatives that were so prevalent before the socialist period, and now people have forgotten about them. They have to relearn this was a form of commoning kind of markets in a way. So the book, there's lots of these kind of tools that help you and help people to think about these ethical practices. And in a sense, they're kind of tools that I think are embodied in projects like Company Drinks, where you're accepting that people have multiple subject positions, they've got multiple relationships to economies, ones that they had in the past, ones they could have in the future, and they're experimenting with opening up the drinks cabinet, looking at these other kinds of practices in order to generate these new economic relationships, but at the same time also a different kind of art practice in the making. So this to me is very much a practice of building community economies. And I've used a similar kind of practices in resource regions in Australia. This is just a project I was involved in many years ago to try and reimagine a brown coal mining region. What kind of economy could you imagine in a place where you displaced coal as the primary resource and put people as the primary resource? And we used these kind of photo essays as a way of people exploring their attachment to coal, an attachment and sense of loss when the coal mines were privatised, and potentially the sense of loss that people are going to experience now with the idea of closure. Young people who had no sense that they had a future in this area. And in this project we started to develop new community enterprises against the background of this kind of extractive world. I wouldn't call this art necessarily, but certainly visual practices and getting people involved in doing this kind of exploration of their subjectivity in this visual way was certainly very kind of cathartic and also helpful for them to present to each other what their commitments and hopes could be in this environment. Just before I go on to the last few slides, there's a project I'm involved in at the moment, which is really about the future of manufacturing in Australia. And in it, I won't have time to show this, but we've used a lot of photographs of hands at work into a kind of a video of with music and sound to try and just bring the idea of manufacturing back into the public realm, because so few people have any conception of what goes on in the manufacturing sector anymore. I could show that, but I think we haven't got time. So, lastly, I guess, let's see. As part of the Redrawing Economy project, we had a workshop last year at the Centre for Plausible Economies, and people from Colombia, Finland, and South Korea came together to share their experiences of doing this redrawing. But we also had a day working with artists from the greater London and metropolitan, all of UK really, on mapping their own art, their own economies and connections. And maybe Katherine, you want to just mention some of these kind of exercises? This was some drawings that came out after that workshop.
Yeah, maybe we should see next. And so I think there were two exercises. One was to use this redrawing methodology to become aware of your actual support systems and economies. And I think with artists, the iceberg at the top is the art market. We know that we all think that dominates art, but it's also where a lot of artists are like striving towards, and if you're not getting to the top of the iceberg, to the market, where are you? So this, maybe we go back to the on the grass thing, or forward, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
And so the exercise is really for artists to understand what supports their practice as artists. And those are, in most cases, very, very diverse economies, unless you're a very wealthy parent or you have a very successful commercial career. So this is an exercise of understanding what are the economic underpinnings for most artists. And I think you've done that study that the art market only supports a very small percentage of the wider art community. So this is an exercise of understanding your own economic reality, but it's also a way of reclaiming, taking back the economy and not producing towards this idea of the market is the only possibility. So that's, the left one was for an individual artist, and then the whole group could completely identify with this diversity of income, which is a mix between teaching, a bit of commissions, a bit of collective work, a bit of selling, like really, really mixed. And on the right hand is more of an institutional mapping, which was done by the Alistair Hudson, who is the director of the Whitworth Museum, but he's also part of the Office for Useful Art, which is an archive of art that has a social function, which has been initiated by this artist Tanya Bruguera, and that's a mapping of how acquisition into museum collections can cut short this kind of gallery market nexus and maybe purchase directly through the artist, but not based on a contract of ownership, but on a base of usership. So that again was, the mapping is an understanding of how you operate, but it also is a tool to maybe strategically strengthen or nurture certain transactions or ways of relating. So it's also about the possibility of organizing and financing things differently. And then we commissioned Rosalie Schweiker to map London's art economies, and she was like, thank you very much. But she has a very sharp way of bringing things to the point. So that was her task, but doesn't matter however small you think you are, like the heart, there's still a way of articulating. So she kind of that was a commission by the Center for Plausible Economies to also commission those mappings as artist commissions. She identified the different currencies in art, affiliation, visibility, and cash, and then maybe her other slide. They're just very funny and correct. So yeah, if you have the privilege and if you think all you think about is art, and you make this photo of the sea, within the convention how we think art, it's much easier to sell it. But a lot of my colleagues have this other situation where first of all you don't just want to think about art, but also you can't just think about art. There's like a lot of other stuff you have to think about, just practical livelihood terms. And then you also think, I don't want to do this on my own, I do it with others. And then you get this, where like no one quite exactly understands how this, what it is and what it can be, and it definitely doesn't work on the market. So this was also an illustration of realities. Yeah.
That's true. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess that's the end.
Yeah, thank you very much. So the last slides were obviously also an invitation for tomorrow's mapping exercise, because that's what we are going to kind of facilitate tomorrow at noon in front of Ujazdowski Castle. But then I'm sure that lots of you have many questions for this excellent lecture. Thank you very much. It was amazing. But yeah, questions?
Thanks a lot for your talk. I totally think that some shaking up of imagination is necessary for us to progress beyond capitalism. What I'm sort of skeptical about in your proposition is how far a focus on identity can take us, be it sexual, race, gender, etc., etc. If we take this heteronormative family, it's very well-known fact that all sorts of sexual minorities are perfect consumers, perfectly integrated into the market. All of them, because they do not have families, have a lot of disposable income, so they are great targets for marketing, etc. This is not to say that a family is any protection against capitalism. This is to say that this dimension, I think, is completely irrelevant. Capitalism has got ways of integrating both. So you can be either, and it doesn't matter for capitalism. Also, a lot of these alternative subjective positions that you mentioned, I think they work perfectly well within capitalism, be it wage labor or non-wage labor. So, totally applauding the cause and the general framework. I'm just wondering, where is this practically this subversive potential in queering, for instance?
Well, I guess, first of all, we've used it to try and queer the economy rather than, we haven't used it as a kind of identity. I'm not interested that much in identity politics as a political platform. But I do think the idea of a decentered subject or a the multiple subject is a really useful concept for understanding a lot of what's going on in our political life and world at the moment. Because, and I do think probably it's not being deployed enough in trying to understand why it is that, 8% of that group could have voted for Brexit and so on. Whereas at the same time, you can enrol them in this kind of project and they can see and talk to the migrant workers, in the hot fields in an interesting way. So I don't think I have an answer to you right now on this, but I feel like, and I don't see our work as enrolling identity politics that much. I see it as a kind of opening to loosen up, because I think, certainly when I've just come out of a country that's had a federal election where people have been hailed as centred subjects who are only concerned about their pocket, how much money they have coming from tax breaks and so on. And I think the political parties that are trying to do something different are not accepting the kind of the fact that it's very hard to unlearn one's connection to an extractivist economy at the same time that one might be interested in dealing with climate change because of concern for the planet and for one's children. So how those multiple kind of commitments are being held in people at the moment, I think, and the disjuncture of these kinds of commitments, I think, is creating a lot of weird voting behaviour and so on, but I don't think we're really appreciating it enough and accepting and respecting the kind of the confusion of multiple kind of commitments. And so I feel like it's something that could be worked on a lot more. I think when it comes to thinking about economic experimentation, we have a lot of expectation that people should immediately become alternative economic subjects and be satisfied with certain things, rather than assuming that that's always going to be difficult too. So I guess it's really, for me, a way of, trying to do this kind of inventory, in a way, inventory of the self and of groups and rich description of what's going on. I don't think we've got an answer at the moment, but I'm not willing to see the fact that, yes, capitalism appeals to gay couples because they've got two incomes. I don't see that's a reason to abandon the idea of a decentered self. There's plenty of other caring practices that are going on. Actually, we've got a handbook coming out of Diverse Economies, and one of the articles is by a gay theorist who's talking about the kind of homonormativity that's happened with the kind of acceptance of same-sex marriage and so on, and a kind of the strange nature of that politics in terms of fitting in with that kind of vision of the family. At the same time, he's talking about all the kind of community practices that people are performing around sharing access to certain kinds of antiviral drugs and so on. So that, there's complexity. I think it fits with your idea of keeping it complex and not making it too simple. So that's a very incoherent answer to your very pointed question.
continue this conversation, because in the end of capitalism, as you knew it, you use the term class, and in quite an innovative way, not class understand not as a social group or groups, but a process of accommodation distribution. Can you please develop on this feminist?
Yeah, and I think really, in a way, that was the first move towards accepting diversity of diverse economic practices. So this is a kind of an approach to class as a process rather than class as a category. And it's an anti-essentialist kind of application of the theory of class being the process of producing, appropriating and distributing surplus. So in that view, we could talk about being involved in multiple class processes. So in the household, I could be part of a communal class process in terms of how my household is producing values and distributing them in the family. At the same time, I could work in a workplace where I'm part of a capitalist class process as a manager or something, or a self-employed person who is involved in a form of independent class process. So it was a kind of an approach developed by Steve Resnick and Rick Wolff, who are Marxist economists at the University of Massachusetts, and they really, they're kind of, I guess, a form of post-structuralist Marxist, using this notion of class. So rather than, and I guess it's a way of understanding the kind of irrelevance of class language when it's put into that categorical sense. And the Australian election's a great example, where we have a Labor Party that's saying we're for the working class, but the biggest swing against them was from people who were, coal miners and truck drivers and so on, who put their votes towards these weird independent populists, because they're involved in multiple class processes. Many of them are kind of operating as a more self-employed contractor, where their income is very high, so their interest in the fact that they can't negative gear and buy other properties and rent them out and get tax loopholes and so on. So people, even so-called working class people or manual workers, are involved in multiple economic relationships that are class and non-class based, that need to be unpacked in order to understand their interests and so on. And the term working class and middle class seem to be, they're kind of, they're shorthand terms that are appealing to some realities that aren't there anymore, I think. They might be culturally still useful, but in terms of economic analysis, I think they're almost beyond use these days.
And maybe I just wanted to ask, what, in your opinion, is the relationship between all these sort of all these collectives or communities who develop these alternatives, usually in a kind of local level, to capitalism, or like enact these different diverse economies, and post-capitalism understand as a sort of systemic change? Will it kind of be a sort of gradual process of tipping over, or will it? Imagine you understand the question. So.
Well, I mean, I don't think I have a kind of I don't have a systemic sense of a tipping over necessarily. I mean, I think this is where social theory is having a real problem at the moment, to figure out what a theory of change is that's relevant to the world we're in. I mean, clearly we need a massive change if we think about the Anthropocene and the Great Acceleration and so on. But it's not going to come from revolutionary kind of movements, or at least that kind of notion of structural change which we've seen didn't really happen or didn't work that effectively. I mean, it worked in some ways, but and I guess the interest at the moment is in this kind of assemblage politics, that there are these multiple infrastructures that are accepting, that are living, that are kind of coexisting. And I mean, one could look at the energy system as an example, where there's huge kind of uptake of community-based renewable energy, and it's starting to shift dramatically the kind of economics of the centralised power system. So it's already starting to make change in that particular sector, and it's happening through different kinds of financial instruments, different, obviously, technological changes, different adoptions, different kinds of political movements. There's solar citizens, there's these kinds of movements, and it's creating a kind of, it's probably started incremental, but it's starting to gather force and reverberate through societies in different ways. But I don't have a kind of coherent theory of this, and I don't see post-capitalism as a thing so much as a set of, again, just as I don't see capitalism as a thing, I see it as a set of practices. And I think post-capitalism is going to be a similar thing, a set of post-capitalist practices in which I can imagine, and I think their capitalist business will still play a role. And this is partly why I'm interested in doing work with capitalist corporations that are enacting different kinds of ethics, not just private profit for personal gain. And as we were talking about it earlier, so I think there is going to be a sense of a diverse ecosystem of different kinds of economic entities that have the potential to put an ethical commitment to ecological sustainability and economic justice at the fore of their economic practice, and trying to facilitate and support those through just grassroots support, but also policy support, is where I would see kind of trying to enact that kind of change. It's hard to do it at the moment. Things seem to be so bleak, but there are. I mean, I guess my practice is because I'm interested in research as a performative practice. My interest is finding as many examples as possible that can give us some sense of a different way forward, and whether that's national economic policy, like transition policy in the Ruhr Valley, for instance, or everything is imperfect. It always will be. But I think that the task of a theorist is to be looking for those glimmers and to amplify them and put them out there, because this change will only be stitched together in a kind of an experimental and ad hoc way. I can't see anything else. We've tried structural change and major revolution, and it had some effect.
Yeah, thank you. Any other comments, questions?
I think, because it's a question of imagination, and I think to build alternatives, we need to have stronger images, and it's a comment on different presentations that are showing this 5 people on the grass, with some papers, writing on them, and I'm afraid it's not taken seriously. And when you speak about renewable energies and this kind of cooperatives, when you speak about cooperative banks, new technologies, things like Mozilla, Wikipedia, and computer programming, and so on and so on. This might maybe change the mainstream, not the artists and people who are working for NGOs. And I would like to ask you, are you studying banks, cooperative banks? And because I would really love to belong to a cooperative bank, and instead I'm belonging to, I'm co-financing one of the biggest very bad banking system. But the alternative here is very small, but still, it's possible. It's like with this energy, unfortunately here, right now the government is killing alternative energy. So it's even more difficult probably than banking. But I think we should think big and show as many examples of these big changes like housing cooperatives, banking cooperatives, solar cooperatives, and so on, to show that this is our money and we have this power.
No, I agree, and yes, I'm personally not working on this, but people in the research network are working on this indeed. Looking at the different kinds of banks that are more ethically oriented or community oriented, the kind of financing, the multiple kinds of financing for community energy, which can happen even outside of when there's no policy support, through community supported membership ownership and so on of small wind farms and so on. So the handbook that we're just about to publish early next year has many examples of, there's a whole section on finance, a whole section on community land trusts and property, social housing and so on. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of work on that kind of thing, and I guess once you start to see all the different examples, I think what we haven't done is tried to put together all these practices into a kind of one framework in a way to try and show how a kind of this heterogeneous kind of system based on ethical practices could come together. But I think there are people trying to do that through blockchain, and the peer-to-peer foundation is a way of trying to think about a more global network that would allow for various kinds of cooperativism to flourish through using the internet and so on. So I think there's stuff out there, and it's a matter of I guess looking for examples, and the fact that they're not happening in Poland right at the moment is a problem. But having examples of what can happen elsewhere is also good in terms of trying to influence policy and so on. And one of the places I have studied, which it also gets a lot of criticism by purists on the left, is the Mondragon regional economies in the Basque regions of Spain, which is, employs. It's a network that's been going since the 1950s of worker-owned cooperatives with their own banking system, their own social service system, and so on. And it's very much a very durable form of economy that is incredibly equitable, but it's also had to deal with globalisation, and it is quite hybrid these days. It has a mixture of capitalist as well as worker cooperatives. But in general, the difference in wages between the top and the bottom in any company is no more than 1 to 6. In terms of the lowest and the highest wage, whereas most corporations in the other parts of the world, it could be 1 to 200 or something. So it's possible to have these kinds of equitable mechanisms and have a very long-standing and viable and durable regional economy. So the examples are there, but we just need to know more about them, document them in one place.
Okay, thank you very much. Before we go, let me pass the microphone to Pavel, the director of Binna.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank our guests for wonderful presentations. Thank you, Katrin Böhm, Binna, Choi, and Katherine Gibson for everything, for these wonderful lectures. I would like to thank you for your presence and invite all for reception. We will start at 8:30, and please feel invited for our events, lectures, performances, and finally assemblies. in the framework of Biennale Warszawa. So thank you very much.